All right, welcome to another episode of the Z-Rock Show. I apologize for not doing a live stream yesterday. Yesterday was Monday, August 14th, 2023. But I needed a day off. I was unproductive, but hey, the Lord's got to rest on Sunday, even if it's not Saturday. Anyway, today we're back with our reading of Plato. It's very important to keep up with my Plato reading because, as I've titled this video, the world is not rational, the world is religious. It's a very metaphysical way of putting it, but here we go. Just got back from working out, by the way, half an hour of cardio. Very good for my body and spirit. Okay, so where should I continue from? I forget every single time where I stop reading. Okay, I found it. Okay, so this is, for those keeping up, I'd like to just mention that we're on line 270, section C, where Phaedrus goes, "That is most likely, Socrates." Socrates goes, "Do you think then that it is possible to reach a serious understanding of the nature of the soul without understanding the nature of the world as a whole?" Phaedrus: "Well, if we're to listen to Hippocrates, Asclepius' descendant, we won't even understand the body if we don't follow that method." Socrates: "He speaks well, my friend. Still, Hippocrates aside, we must consider whether argument supports that view." Phaedrus: "I agree." Socrates: "Consider then what both Hippocrates and true arguments say about nature. Isn't this the way to think systematically about the nature of anything? First, we must consider whether the object regarding which we intend to become experts and capable of transmitting our expertise is simple or complex. Then, if it is simple, we must investigate its power. What things does it have? What natural power of acting upon? By what things does it have? What natural disposition to be acted upon? If, on the other hand, it takes many forms, we must enumerate them all and, as we did in the simple case, investigate how each is naturally able to act upon what and how it has a natural disposition to be acted upon what. It seems so." All right, sorry about that. It seems so. Socrates: "Proceeding by any other method would be like walking with a blind. Conversely, whoever studies anything on the basis of an art must never be compared to the blind or the deaf. On the contrary, it is clear that someone who teaches another to make speeches as an art will demonstrate precisely the essential nature of that to which speeches are to be applied, and that surely is the soul." Of course. Socrates: "This is therefore the object toward which the speaker's whole effort is directed, since it is in the soul that he attempts to produce conviction. Isn't that so?" I just have to make sure that we're in the view. Phaedrus: "Yes." Socrates: "Clearly, therefore, Thrasymachus and anyone else who teaches the art of rhetoric seriously will first describe the soul with absolute precision and enable us to understand what it is, whether it is one and homogeneous by nature or takes many forms, like the shape of body, since, as we said, that's what it is to demonstrate the nature of something." Phaedrus: "Absolutely." Socrates: "Second, he will explain how, in virtue of its nature, it acts and is acted upon by certain things." Phaedrus: "Of course." Third, he will classify the kinds of speech and of soul there are, as well as the various ways in which they are affected, and explain what causes each. He will then coordinate each kind of soul with a kind of speech appropriate to it. And he will give instructions concerning the reasons why one kind of soul is necessarily convinced by one kind of speech, while another necessarily remains unconvinced. Phaedrus. This, I think, would certainly be the best way. Socrates. In fact, my friend, no speech will ever be a product of art, whether it is a model or one actually given, if it is delivered or written in any other way, on this or any other subject. But those who will now write arts of rhetoric, we were just discussing them, are cunning people. They hide the fact that they know very well everything about the soul. I mean, it's funny that Socrates says, but those who now write, arts of rhetoric, well, Aristotle actually wrote a treatise called something very similar. So, and you know where Aristotle is in the line of philosophy, right? Well, then, until they begin to speak and write in this way, we mustn't allow ourselves to be convinced that they write on the basis of the art. Phaedrus. What way is that? Socrates. It's very difficult to speak about the actual words, but as to how one should write in order to be as artful as possible, that I'm willing to tell you. Phaedrus. Please do. Socrates. Since the nature of speech is in fact to direct the soul, whoever intends to be a rhetorician must know how many kinds of soul there are. This number is so and so many, each is of such and such a sort. Hence, some people have such and such a character, and others have such and such. Those distinctions established, and there are in turn so and so many kinds of speech, each of such and such a sort. People of such and such a character are easy to persuade by speeches of such and such a sort in connection with such and such an issue for this particular reason, while people of such and such another sort are difficult to persuade for those particular reasons. I'd love to know the Greek for such and such. The orator must learn all this well, then put his theory into practice and develop the ability to discern each kind clearly as it occurs in the actions of real life. Otherwise, he won't be any better off than he was when he was still listening to those discussions in school. He will now not only be able to say what kind of person is convinced by what kind of speech. On meeting someone, he will be able to discern what he is like and make clear to himself that the person actually standing in front of him is of just this particular sort of character he had learned about in school. To that, he must now apply speeches of such and such a kind in this particular way in order to secure conviction about such and such an issue. When he has learned all this, when in addition he has grasped the right occasions for speaking and for holding back, and when he has also understood when the time is right for speaking concisely or appealing to pity or exaggeration, or for any other of the kinds of speech he has learned, and when it is not, then and only then will he have finally mastered the art well and completely. But if his speaking, his teaching, or his writing lacks any one of those elements, and he still claims to be speaking with art, you'll be better off if you don't believe him. Well, Socrates and Phaedrus, the author of this discourse, might say, do you agree? Could we accept an art of speaking presented in any other terms? Phaedrus. That would be impossible, Socrates. Still, it's evidently rather a major undertaking. Socrates. You're right, and that's why we must turn all our arguments every which way and try to find some easier and shorter route to the art. We don't want to follow a long, rough path for no good reason when we can choose a short, smooth one instead. Now try to remember if you've heard anything helpful from Lysias or anybody else. Speak up. Phaedrus. It's not for lack of trying, but nothing comes to mind right now. Socrates. Well, then, shall I tell you something I've heard people say who care about this topic? Phaedrus. Of course. Socrates. We do claim, after all, Phaedrus, that it is fair to give the wolf side of the story as well. Phaedrus. That's just what you should do. Socrates. Well, these people say that there is no need to be so solemn about all this and stretch it out to such lengths, but the fact is, as we said ourselves at the beginning of this discussion, that one who intends to be an able rhetorician has no need to know the truth about the things that are just or good or yet about the people who are such either by nature or upbringing. No one in a law court, you see, cares at all about the truth of such matters. They only care about what is convincing. This is called the likely, and that is what a man who intends to speak according to art or defending a case to art should concentrate on. Sometimes, in fact, whether you are prosecuting or defending a case, you must not even say what actually happened if it was not likely to have happened. You must say something that is likely instead. Whatever you say, you should pursue what is likely and leave the truth aside. The whole art consists in cleaving to that throughout your speech. Phaedrus. That's an excellent presentation of what people say who profess to be expert in speeches, Socrates. I recall that we praised this issue briefly earlier on, but it seems to be their single most important point. Socrates, no doubt you've churned through Tisius' book quite carefully. Then let's Tisius tell us this also. By the likely, does he mean anything but what is accepted by the crowd? Phaedrus. What else? Socrates. And it is likely, and it is likely it was when he discovered this clever and artful technique that Tisius wrote that if a weak but spunky man, again, I'd like to know the Greek for that word, but spunky man is taken to court because he beat up a strong but cowardly one and stole his cloak or anything else, neither one should tell the truth. The coward must say that the spunky man didn't beat him up all by himself, while the latter must rebut this by saying that only the two of them were there, and fall back on that well-worn plea, how could a man like me attack a man like him? The strong man, naturally, will not admit his cowardice, but will try to invent some other lie, and may thus give his opponent the chance to refute him. And in other cases, speaking as the art dictates will take similar forms. Isn't that so, Phaedrus? Phaedrus, of course. Socrates. Phew. Okay, this translator is really taking creative licenses. Who is the translator here? Phaedrus, Alexander Nehemus, and Paul Woodruff. Well, Mr. Nehemus and Woodruff, you need to do a better job. That's right. You need to do a better job than say, phew. But because I am the presenter, the orator, I will continue with that line. Socrates, phew, Tisius, or whoever else it was, and whatever name he pleases to use for himself, seems to have discovered an art which he has disguised very well. But now, my friend, shall we or shall we not say to him? Phaedrus, what? Socrates, this. Tisius, some time ago before you came into the picture, we were saying that people get the idea of what is likely through its similarity to the truth. And we just explained that in every case, the person who knows the truth knows best how to determine similarities. So if you have something new to say about the art of speaking, we shall listen. But if you don't, we shall remain convinced by the explanations we gave just before. No one will ever possess the art of speaking to the extent that any human being can, unless he acquires the ability to enumerate the sorts of characters to be found in any audience, to divide everything according to its kinds, and to grasp each single thing firmly by means of one form. And no one can acquire these abilities without great effort, a laborious effort a sensible man will make, not in order to speak and act among human beings, but so as to be able to speak and act in a way that pleases the gods as much as possible. Wiser people than ourselves, Tisius, say that a reasonable man must put his mind to being pleasant, not to his fellow slaves, though this may happen as a side effect, but to his masters, who are wholly good. So if the way round is long, don't be astonished. We must make this detour for the sake of things that are very important, not for what you have in mind. Still, as our argument asserts, if that is what you want, you'll get it best as a result of pursuing our own goal. Phaedrus, what you've said is wonderful, Socrates. If only it could be done. Man, this guy doesn't really have any faith. Socrates, yet surely whenever we must go through on the way to an honorable goal is itself honorable. Phaedrus, certainly. Socrates, well then, that's enough about artfulness and artlessness in connection with speaking. Phaedrus, quite. Socrates, what's left then is aptness and inaptness in connection with writing. What feature makes writing good and what inept, right? Phaedrus, yes. Socrates, well, do you know how best to please God when you either use words or discuss them in general? Phaedrus, not at all. Do you? Socrates, I can tell you what I've learned, what I've heard the ancients said, though they alone know the truth. However, if we could discover that ourselves, would we still care about the speculations of other people? Phaedrus, that's a silly question. Still, tell me what you say you've heard. Socrates, well, this is what I've heard. Among the ancient gods of Naucratis in Egypt, there was one to whom the bird called the ibis is sacred. The name of that divinity was Thought. For those who are curious about how that's spelled, that's Theuth. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly. Taught. And it was he who first discovered number and calculation, geometry and astronomy, as well as the games of checkers and dice, and above all else, writing. Now the king of all Egypt at that time was Thamus, who lived in the great city in the upper region that the Greeks call Egyptian Thebes. Thamus they call Ammon. Thought came to exhibit his arts to him and urged him to disseminate them to all the Egyptians. Thamus asked him about the usefulness of each art, and while Thought was explaining it, Thamus praised him for whatever he thought was right in his explanations and criticized him for whatever he thought was wrong. The story goes that Thamus said much to Thought, both for and against each art, which it would take too long to repeat. But when they came to writing, Thought said, O king, here is something that, once learned, will make the Egyptians wiser and will improve their memory. I have discovered a potion for memory and for wisdom. Thamus, however, replied, O most expert Thought, one man can give birth to the elements of an art, but only one another can judge how they can benefit or harm those who will use them. And now, since you're the father of writing, your affection for it has made you describe its effects as the opposite of what they really are. In fact, it will introduce forgetfulness into the soul of those who learn it. They will not practice using their memory because they will put their trust in writing, which is external and depends on signs that belong to others. Instead of trying to remember from the inside, completely on their own, you have not discovered a potion for remembering, but for reminding. You provide your students with the appearance of wisdom, not with its reality. Your invention will enable them to hear many things without being properly taught, and they will imagine that they have come to know much, while for the most part they will know nothing. Da 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 da. That is such a zinger, ladies and gentlemen. That is such a zinger. And they will be difficult to get along with, since they will merely appear to be wise instead of really being so. Phaedrus, Socrates, you're very good at making up stories from Egypt or wherever else you want. Socrates, but my friend, the priests of the temple of Zeus at Dodona say that the first prophecies were the words of an oak. Everyone who lived at that time, not being as wise as you young ones are today, found it rewarding enough in their simplicity to listen to an oak or even a stone so long as it was telling the truth. While it seems to make a difference to you, Phaedrus, who is speaking and where he comes from, why, though, don't you just consider whether what he says is right or wrong? Phaedrus, I deserve that, Socrates. And I agree that the Theban king was correct about writing. Socrates, well then, those who think they can leave written instructions for an art, as well as those who accept them, thinking that writing can yield results that are clear or certain, must be quite naive and truly ignorant of Ammon's prophetic judgment. Otherwise, how could they possibly think that words that have been written down can do more than remind those who already know what the writing is about? Phaedrus, quite right. Socrates, you know, Phaedrus. Writing shares a strange feature with painting. The offsprings of painting stand there as if they are alive, but if anyone asks them anything, they remain most solemnly silent. The same is true of written words. You think they were speaking as if they had some understanding. But if you question anything that has been said because you want to learn more, it continues to signify just that very same thing forever. When it has once been written down, every discourse roams about everywhere, reaching indiscriminately those with understanding no less than those who have no business with it, and it doesn't know to whom it should speak and to whom it should not. And when it is faulted and attacked unfairly, it always needs its father's support alone. It can neither defend itself nor come to its own support. I see some Strauss in here, ladies and gentlemen. In particular, that line that goes like, when it has once been written down, every discourse roams about everywhere, reaching indiscriminately those with understanding no less than those who have no business with it, and it doesn't know to whom it should speak and to whom it should not. Right. The perceptive few, right, that are capable of getting the message. Anyway, Phaedrus, you are absolutely right about that too, Socrates. Now tell me, can we discern another kind of discourse, a legitimate brother of this one? Can we say how it comes about and how it is by nature better and more capable? Phaedrus, which one is that? How do you think it comes about, Socrates? It is a discourse that is written down with knowledge in the soul of the listener. It can defend itself, and it knows for whom it should speak and for whom it should remain silent. Phaedrus, you mean the living, breathing discourse of the man who knows, of which the written one can be fairly called an image? Socrates, absolutely right. And tell me this, would a sensible farmer who cared about his seeds and wanted them to yield fruit plant them in all seriousness in the gardens of Adonis in the middle of the summer and enjoy watching them bear fruit within 7 days? Or would he do this as an amusement, an honor of the holiday, if he did it at all? Wouldn't he use his knowledge of farming to plant the seeds he cared for when it was appropriate and be content if they bore fruit 7 months later? Phaedrus, that's how he would handle those he was serious about, Socrates. Quite differently from the others, as you say. Socrates, now what about the man who knows what is just, noble, and good? Shall we say that he is less sensible with his seeds than the farmer is with his? Phaedrus, certainly not. Socrates, therefore, he won't be serious about writing them in ink, sewing them through a pen with words that are as incapable of speaking in their own defense as they are of teaching the truth adequately. Phaedrus, that wouldn't be likely. Socrates, certainly not. When he writes, it's likely he will sow gardens with letters for the sake of amusing himself, storing up reminders for himself when he reaches forgetful old age, and for everyone who wants to follow in his footsteps and will enjoy seeing them sweetly blooming. And when others turn to different amusements, watering themselves with drinking parties and everything else that goes along with them, he will rather spend his time amusing himself with the things I have just described. Phaedrus, Socrates, you are contrasting a vulgar amusement with the very noblest, with the amusement of a man who can while away his time telling stories of justice and the other matters you mentioned. Socrates, that's just how it is, Phaedrus, but it is much nobler to be serious about these matters and use the art of dialectic. The dialectician chooses a proper soul and plants and sows within it discourse accompanied by knowledge, discourse capable of helping itself as well as the man who planted it, which is not barren but produces a seed from which more discourse grows in the character of others. Such discourse makes the seed forever immortal and renders the man who has it as happy as any human being can be. Phaedrus, what you describe is really much nobler still, Socrates. And now that we have agreed about this, Phaedrus, we are finally able to decide the issue. Phaedrus, what issue is that? Socrates, the issue which brought us to this point in the first place. We wanted to examine the attack made on Lysias on account of his writing speeches, and to ask which speeches are written artfully and which not. Now, I think that we have answered the question clearly enough. Phaedrus, so it seemed, but remind me again how we did it. Socrates, first, you must know the truth concerning everything you are speaking or writing about. You must learn how to define each thing in itself, and having defined it, you must know how to divide it into kinds up until you reach something indivisible. Second, you must understand the nature of the soul along the same lines. You must determine which kind of speech is appropriate to each kind of soul, prepare and arrange your speech accordingly, and offer a complex and elaborate speech to a complex soul and a simple speech to a simple one. Then and only then will you be able to use speech artfully and to the extent that its nature allows it to be used that way, either in order to teach or in order to persuade. This is the whole point of the argument we have been making. Whoa. Phaedrus, absolutely. That is exactly how it seemed to us. Socrates, now, how about whether it's noble or shameful to give or write a speech, when it could be fairly said to be grounds for reproach, and when not? Didn't what we said just a little while ago make it clear? Phaedrus, what was that? Socrates, that if Lysias or anybody else ever did or ever does write, privately or for the public, in the course of proposing some law, a political document which he believes to embody clear knowledge of lasting importance, then this writer deserves reproach, whether anyone says so or not. For to be unaware of the difference between a dream image and the reality of what is just and unjust, good and bad, must truly be grounds for reproach, even if the crowd praises it with one voice. Phaedrus, it certainly must be. Socrates, on the other hand, take a man who thinks that a written discourse on any subject can only be a great amusement, that no discourse worth serious attention has ever been written in verse or prose, and that those that are recited in public without question and an explanation in the manner of the rhapsodes are given only in order to produce conviction. He believes that at their very best, these can only serve as reminders to those who already know. And he also thinks that only what is said for the sake of understanding and learning what is truly written in the soul concerning what is just, noble, and good can be clear, perfect, and worth serious attention. Such discourses should be called his own his own legitimate children. First, the discourse he may have discovered already within himself, and then its sons and brothers, who may have grown naturally in other souls, insofar as they are worthy. To the rest, he turns his back. Such a man, Phaedrus, would be just what you and I said would pray to become. Such a man, Phaedrus, would be just what you and I both would pray to become. Phaedrus, I wish and pray for things to be just as you say. Socrates, well then, our playful amusement regarding discourse is complete. Now you go and tell Lysias that we came to this spring, which is sacred to the nymphs, and heard words charging us to deliver a message to Lysias and anyone else who composes speeches, as well as to Homer and anyone else who has composed poetry, either spoken or sung, and third to Solon and anyone else who writes political documents that he calls laws. If any one of you has composed these things with a knowledge of the truth, if you can defend your writing when you are challenged, and if you can say yourself, make the argument that your writing is of little worth, then you must be called by a name derived not from these writings, but rather from those that you are seriously pursuing. Phaedrus, what name then would you give such a man? Socrates, to call him wise, Phaedrus, seems to me too much and proper only for a god. To call him wisdom's lover, a philosopher, or something similar would fit him better and more seemly. Phaedrus, that would be quite appropriate. Socrates, on the other hand, if a man has nothing more valuable than what he has composed or written, spending long hours twisting it around, pasting parts together and taking them apart, wouldn't you be right to call him a poet or a speechwriter or an author of laws? Phaedrus, of course. Socrates, tell that then to your friend. Phaedrus, what about you? What shall you do? We must surely not forget your own friend. Socrates, whom do you mean? Phaedrus, the beautiful Isocrates. Is that how I say that? Isocrates? What are you going to tell him, Socrates? What shall we say he is? Socrates, Socrates, is still young, Phaedrus, but I want to tell you what I foresee for him. Phaedrus, what is that? Socrates, it seems to me that by his nature he can outdo anything that Lysias has accomplished in his speeches, and he also has a nobler character. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if he, If, as he gets older, continues writing speeches of the sort he is composing now, he makes everyone who has ever attempted to compose a speech seem like a child in comparison. Even more so if such work no longer satisfy him and a higher divine impulse leads him to more important things. For nature, my friend, has placed the love of wisdom in his mind. That is the message I will carry to my beloved Isocrates. From the gods of this place, and you have your own message for your Lycius, Phaedrus. So it shall be. But let's be off, since the heat has died down a bit. Socrates, shouldn't we offer a prayer to the gods here before we leave? Phaedrus, of course. Socrates, oh dear Pan and all the other gods of this place, grant that I may be beautiful inside. Let all my external possession be in friendly harmony with what is within. May I consider the wise man rich. As for gold, let me have as much as moderate man could bear and carry with him. Do we need anything else, Phaedrus? I believe my prayer is enough for me. Phaedrus, make it a prayer for me as well. Friends have everything in common. Socrates, let's be off. Before I weep tears of joy, let me just say a thing or two. This is the second time I've read Phaedrus since, no, it's actually probably the third or fourth time. Actually, fourth or fifth time. Since 2018, I want to say. And it gets better and better every single time. And every single time I've read it, I've been in a different state of mind, and I've been in different circumstances, dealing with different circumstances in my life. But I feel honored to be able to read Plato because of what I just read. I mean, that prayer alone, at the very end, is such a powerful declaration of what is worthy of owning, having, striving for, and not to ignore the rest of the dialogue or play. How beautifully it's composed and how playful it is. Of course, Plato uses the art of writing himself in an interesting way, and there's a lot to say about that, the metaphors and all that. But of course, Plato is a master of the craft himself. I mean, just that part about language is fascinating to me because I think of my paintings having a kind of language that I'm still discovering, and that I'm still I don't want to say controlling, because I don't want to strain myself in any way. I'd rather let the paintings, the images show up as they are. I don't want to compare it to anything. I don't want to compare my paintings to anything. But yes, what I am striving for is to clear out the imprecisions and the falsity of shapes in my paintings. I would like to get rid of things that are false and lies. I detect that in my paintings. I feel it in my paintings. I really want to what would be the right way? Dispense with all that. Yeah, and on the other hand, that's a negative side of things. Getting rid of things, subtracting things. But on the other hand, what I'd like to generate is the kind of logos and speech that is from within, that is mine, and that is not in conflict with the stuff that is within me, right? There are things that bother me at times, and I think when I sense, being bothered, that is an indication that the speech is corrupted in some way, that the text, the image is corrupted in some way. And I mean, this is why I think of painting as a spiritual practice, right? I I don't know how else to say it. I think Plato said it in a more eloquent and powerful way. And ultimately because I want to be at ease with what I'm painting, with what I've painted. And hopefully there's a kind of spiritual maturation and progress over the period of time that I've been painting. That is the kind of progress. It's not the technical kind of progress, although that is a byproduct. That is a practical necessity in some way to advance. But the more important kind is a spiritual maturation that demonstrates kind of ease in what I'm depicting and what I'm showing, portraying. I don't want to impress anyone. I don't want to impress myself because that's ego. Although that's fun, that's why technical, or a certain kind of dexterity would be pleasing to the eye, but more than that, what would be pleasing is a kind of painting, that showcases a soul that's at ease. And artists do that all their lives. They strive for that all their lives. People, when they get into their 70s, they finally, I don't know, read profiles of artists who said that they're finally able to depict something that is honest, or Picasso saying that, he spent 5 years to learn how to paint like so-and-so, but took him a lifetime to paint like a child, right? Because ultimately, the ultimate stages of the spirit is being as simple as a child, not having any guise or sense of being fearful about the world, because the world shouldn't be feared. The world should be, the point is not to hold oneself at an arm's length from the world, but the point is to absorb the world as it is without filtering it much through, because that is corruption, right? If I try to filter things and add this and that, then it's corrupted. But if I allow things to emerge as naturally as they can, then I have added something beautiful to the world. That is the uncorrupted speech or logos that I'm going for. I think I might have repeated myself one too many times there just now, but it's important because, this is why I read Plato. This is why I read Phaedrus in particular, because as a creator, my aim is to be as honest as possible. Even when I'm not fully aware of what that means, I still would like to pursue that, right? Just to remind myself that my goal is to be as honest as possible. Because in that striving for authenticity and honesty, I allow the within to emerge. In the last few lines, Socrates says that, the very last stages of the dialogue, when Socrates offers a prayer to Pan and the other gods, he says, may the things that are outside not be in conflict with the things that are inside, the thing that is inside. I have had personally experienced that kind of disastrous, painful reality where things outside of me, things around me, physically and also relationships and all that, have been in conflict with what is inside of me, and I felt that I've had to suffocate myself and whatever is inside of me in order to be at peace with what's on the outside. But over the past few months, this realization, ever since I really started painting and doing art, I've come to the realization that the stuff that's in the inside should be allowed to come out, and no matter what is on the outside, as long as it is in conflict with the stuff in the inside, then, it's not a peaceful way. You actively get the sense that you're nauseous. But thinking of another philosophic reference here, Nietzsche's seasickness is an interesting way to think about this too, because the idea of seasickness, as a metaphysical state of being, or what soul undergoes, is interesting. I mean, that's living life, in a very real way. You're not shying away from things even when you're experiencing seasickness. You're on the boat, as just like Odysseus, and like whatever comes, I'm not gonna back out of this. And the seasickness is almost a sign of what your soul is undergoing, and that allows transformation. So seasickness and nausea is not necessarily bad. I'm just also proposing the other side of things, which is to be imbued with a lot of falsity also creates kind of seasickness, and I don't think that's a healthy exercise continuously. Once or twice, you'll have some kind of realization, but been living in fear of what the world is, and not being the world not accepting for what's within you will cause an unhappy state of existence. That reminds me of another philosophic reference, the Hegelian unhappy consciousness going from A to B and B to A and A to B and B to A, like flip-flopping the whole time, like what's going on here? Like you don't ever get anywhere, Of course, you wouldn't get to the absolute. I don't even know what the absolute is. Does anybody know what the absolute is? Has anybody read Phenomenology of Spirit and done a thorough explanation for the layman, for the lay audience, of what the absolute is? All right. You know who you are. If you have done a thorough explanation, or you know what the absolute is about, then drop a comment in the chat. All right, I've done my reading of Plato for the day. I just want to let you know that I was working on that painting yesterday. I did the red parts. Also, that's a different painting. That's more like canvas there. The red and the bottom part. But that one I'm really excited about the top one. Anyway, there's more to say about that. But for now, I will sign out. I'll catch you on the other side on pleasebekind.com.